So here we go. This presentation is about teachers' expertise, and the title is Make Meaningful Exercises for English as a Second Language to Accompany Your Book. So basically, it's supposed to give you an idea of how you can enhance your language textbooks with eSquirrel. As the slide says, I'm a teacher in Lower Austria at the grammar school. I teach English as a second language and also biology. I used eSquirrel. I am using eSquirrel in both subjects, and yes, I will talk about that later too. So let's take a look at what the next hour is going to be about. Let's take a look at the contents. The first part is going to be about what eSquirrel is. In case you haven't watched any of the other presentations, I'll give you a brief overview of what eSquirrel is about, what it looks like, how it works, what its benefits are, and then I'll tell you how you can use the different features that eSquirrel provides to enhance language textbooks. Learning a language is key in our modern world. Everything is globalized, especially Austria is a small country, so you basically can't spend your life spending in Austria all the time. You probably sooner or later you will go abroad, and that's when you need a second language, and that's what it's all about. The last part is then about my teacher experience. I don't know where you are watching this from, but in Austria we had several school lockdowns in the past 14 months. And during that time, I used eSquirrel even more, and it helped me even more than before. And I will give you some insights into what it was about. Okay, first part, what is eSquirrel? eSquirrel, as you probably know, I guess you know as much as that, it's a learning app. It supports students when they acquire new knowledge, when they practice knowledge, and when they learn in general. And the good thing is it works on several devices. It works on a smartphone, it works on a tablet. In those two cases, it even works offline, so you don't even need to have internet connections in case that doesn't work, which sometimes was the case during school lockdowns with certain students. Anyway, in case you can't get hold of a mobile device, you can still use eSquirrel on a personal computer or any other device that provides the option to use a browser, an internet browser. What does eSquirrel look like? There are 8 different types of questions. Here you can see 2 of them. And in the course of this presentation, you'll see the other question formats as well. What can you see here? You can see in the right picture, in the right smartphone, you can see a pair match question format. The name says it all. You have to match certain pieces of information. In this case, it's a Latin task where you have to match the versions of where you have to declinate basically. And in the other smartphone screenshot, you can see in the light blue question, you can see a classic gap fill exercise where you have to put the right words in the right places. Yes, eSquirrel is not just about using 8 different types of questions. You can also implement other media, for instance, video. You can use videos to, you can watch them in the app. You can listen to audio files. That's going to be important for us as language teachers or language book publishers. You could also use algebra, which is not really relevant for us in this presentation, but still you can see that it would still work in eSquirrel. So the platform really offers a lot in different fields of study. Here comes the main part. That's actually, these are my favorite features of the whole app. Everyone has their own favorites, but this one is mine actually. Here it says Leaderboard and gamification. What is the gamification about? Students, when they practice and when they get better, they actually have the feeling that they're playing a game on their smartphone when they answer the questions. They have to collect nuts by answering questions, And that's why the symbol of the app is what it is, a squirrel and a nut here. In this case, what you can see in the main picture, in the main screenshot, is there are different chapters. Here you've got a blue chapter, an orange chapter, and a green one. And in each chapter, you can have a certain number of quests, depending on how big the chapter is in the textbook, for instance. But the crucial part is a quest cannot comprise more than 10 questions. And the developers deliberately chose to keep the number of questions you can have at most at 10, because they wanted to have an easy learning experience. They wanted to keep the threshold for starting a short quest as low as possible. 10 questions means for students, it doesn't take much time to just take a short snack, as it were, a snack of knowledge and of studying to do. You can do it on the bus ride home after school. You can do it in between two other activities when you've got 5 spare minutes, when you know you've got dinner in about 10 minutes and you think, okay, I could go through that quest again. It doesn't take much time, and that's one of the key features that eSquirrel has. And here comes the greatest part for me personally is eSquirrel motivates students to repeat what they're practicing. Everyone who learns to play an instrument or does a certain kind of sport knows that you only get better by repeating what you're doing. No one has learned to play the piano after playing each note once. You practice the same melody over and over again. And that's one of the things that I don't like about the classic school system. I mean, you've probably all been in the situation that you've been handed out a worksheet by your teacher. You read it through, you fill it in. Sometimes you care about whether you're right or wrong, and sometimes you don't. You just put it away after you compared it in class maybe, and that's that. You didn't really use it, you just did it because you had to. And I compared it to learning an instrument, because every worksheet or every task, especially in language, has so much more potential. You only have to use the potential by doing it again and again and again. And that's a great thing about eSquirrel. What you can see here is 3 of the quests in the center screenshot have been played through once. And once you've answered all the questions one time, the first time, you reach the bronze level. And that's why the nut is colored in bronze or brownish bronze. And that would be the case with any worksheet you have or you have filled in at school. Now comes the big advantage of eSquirrel. Motivates to do it again and to practice again. How? 24 hours after you've reached the bronze level, you can reach the next level, the so-called silver level. Surprise. And when you've done it a second time, 24 hours at least after you've done it the first time, you get your points doubled. And you can see in the right screenshot that there's a leaderboard in your class that is supposed to motivate students to climb up the leaderboard. And once you're in silver level and your points get doubled, you maybe gain a rank or 2 or 3, and then it's still not over then, because 3 days later you can reach the gold level. You practice the same exercises again a third time. You get more confident, you get faster, and basically you get better. Simple as that. And you can see maybe in the right picture that your points get tripled. So you climb up the leaderboard even more, even faster. And it's still not the end of the story, because 6 days later, you can reach the epic level, the last level, and then you get maximum points. And you're probably really fast by then. You really know what the answers look like. The good thing is eSquirrel obviously shuffles the answers and also the tasks, so you can't play through the quests just by learning everything by heart and learning the order by heart. And that's what I love about this app, that it motivates to do things again and again until you really master things. Okay, so that's the key feature for me personally about eSquirrel. But it's not only that. Teachers also can use it to their advantage, because teachers obviously can see how industrious their students have been. In this case, you can see a screenshot where there's a list of different pupils, students, and the teacher can exactly see which, here we can see a certain quest. And the teacher can see that a number of students has played through the quest 2 times. 3 students even have reached the gold level already, and 5 more have reached the epic level. So they're probably really good by then. You can also see how good they were when they did the quest. You can see, well, a bit blurred, but still it's 5 points out of 5, 4.5, and so on and so forth. Okay, which can be used by the teacher as a way to assess how good his or her students were. Yes, and also very useful, the teacher can decide what quests can be done by the students and what quests cannot yet be done by the students. So the teacher has full control about what the students can learn. You can see the white ticks in the blue squares. So all these quests are unlocked, but you can also see the option that the teacher can lock them. That's particularly useful when you don't want your students to play through some of the quests of topics that you haven't covered in your lessons yet. Yes, and not to forget, you can also set homework, but I'll talk about that later. Very useful. You can set a deadline by which the students have to do the quest at least once. And then you can see who did it in time and who didn't. Yes, class overview is good. Individual progress checks is even better. You can take a look at each individual student, see how good they were, how much they practiced, what quests they played through, how many homework pieces they handed in on time, how many they handed in late or didn't even do at all. And that's also very useful for assessing each student's progress. All right, that was the first part. Now I hope you have got a good overview over what eSquirrel is about. Let's take a look at language textbooks in particular. How can eSquirrel help to improve the learning experience and to make an English textbook even better? eSquirrel can help to train these 4 aspects of language learning. The first one is obviously vocabulary training. And yes, I think I don't need to explain why vocabulary training is important for any language acquisition. Without words, you can't say anything. They're the building blocks of a language, as it were. Second thing is grammar. You can you can establish a certain amount of communication with words, but if the grammar isn't right, it can lead to certain, sometimes severe misunderstandings. And so grammar is also very important, and I'll show you how you can enhance your grammar training or the grammar training of a language textbook with eSquirrel. And the third part is reading comprehension, a classic. You ask questions, you set tasks about certain texts of the textbook, and the students have to answer them. Again, you will see screenshots of how this can work. And last but not least, you can also enhance the listening comprehension skills of your students by implementing audio files that are used in the book. And so you can make the learning experience more individual for each student, because they can re-listen to certain audio files that they probably couldn't in the classroom. Let's take a closer look. Vocabulary training. Classic example is simple translation. That's probably the more conservative approach, but for beginners, it can be quite useful. You've got the pair match question format again. You saw that earlier. There is a word in a certain language, in your own language, and there is the same word in the second language or the third language, and you have to match the words. That's how vocabulary used to be taught in the past. today, many English teachers and many language textbooks take a more modern approach, and they teach vocabulary training by vocabulary in context. What does it mean? The students don't necessarily need to know the exact translation, but they need to know in what circumstances and in what context it makes sense to use these words. And in this case, you see another question format, which is one of my favorites. It's the pair gap question format. You've got two gaps that you need to fill in, but you can see there's a slight difference between the two gaps. The first one is slightly lighter than the second one. And for each gap, you've got a specific box of words or of options that you can fill in. And you can see there are 3 options for the first gap, 4 options for the second gap. And so those two don't get mixed, and that can help students to have a better, vocabulary training success than with other formats. Another, and that's the classic that you already saw earlier, the gap fill exercise. You've got a number of gaps, you've got a number of words or text blocks that you have to fill in the right places. In this case, you can see a dialogue where person A talks with person B, and the students need to fill in the right words. Another question format that you already know, match definitions with the words. You read the definitions, you match them with the words. Just keep in mind that the order of these pairs is shuffled each time the students get to see the questions and practice them, so they cannot learn just the order of the answers by heart and then fill in or match the words, because yes, as I said, they're shuffled every time a student sees the question. True or false question. In vocabulary training, not a classic, but it can be used, doesn't have to. We'll see that one again, that format again, when it comes to reading tasks. Yes, and this one I also love, and I've come to love this actually, this format. I know it's just multiple choice, but it's really usable when it's about vocabulary training, because language is not always black and white. There is not, just like it is probably in maths, that there's just one correct answer and everything else is wrong. In language, it's different. You've got different possible options that are all correct. And for this scenario, the multiple choice question format is perfect. You've got a text, the great thing about this box that it is, and then you've got different words, and some of them are possible and form a correct sentence. You don't have to, but whenever there are more options, you can use multiple choice, and I really like that format. It also shows the students that language is not always black and white, and that there's more different options to express yourself. The same thing, the same principle, but maybe the other way around, is the so-called dustbin format. In this case, you've got a number of options, and you've got to get rid of the wrong options. In this case, it's the classic odd one out, find the odd one out and put it into the dustbin. You see different adjectives, and students have to find out which answers belong, at least in a group, or share certain traits, and which one doesn't. And this one, plump, needs to be put into the dustbin. Yes. So that's a new question format that you haven't seen so far. And also very important, you've all been in the situation, not just in your second language, maybe also in your first language, spelling. It's not always for some words you simply don't know how they are spelled. And with eSquirrel, you can raise the awareness for some of these words, for the spelling of some of these words. You pick the most difficult ones to spell, and you use them in the previous examples that you saw, so the students get across the word. Once they read it, maybe they understand it, they can use it, they have to fill it in a gap fill exercise or something like that. And then mostly at the end of the quest, after they've read it once or twice, you can have them spell the difficult words. In this case, again, it's context. You can see above the picture in the screenshot, you can see a sentence that provides some context for the word, and students have to type it in and thereby practice and train the spelling. And you can imagine after they've reached the gold or the epic level, after they've spelled the word 3 or 4 times, they will know how to spell the word until the end of their lives. And that's what our aim, or what the aim of eSquirrel is. Yes, so this is, I think, yes, that should be. So now you've seen most of the question formats that can be used with eSquirrel. Yes, vocabulary training. Let's go to the next aspect, which is grammar training. And the great thing about grammar training with eSquirrel is it sets the focus on comprehension of the grammar. It's not so much about writing, it's about decision making. Students have to, see what differences there are, what different options there are with grammar, and they have to make a decision, and they have to make the decisions again and again and again, and thereby get better and faster. Let's take a look at the screenshot here. You've got the 3 conditionals. And you can see when you take a look at the 3 sample sentences, if you taste the cake, if you tasted the cake, or if you had tasted the cake, the 3 sentences are more or less the same. There are just tiny differences between the first and the second one. There is just 1 letter, the difference, taste or tasted. But still, grammar makes the difference between I really get what you're trying to say, or maybe it's a huge misunderstanding, and yes, there can be consequences. For instance, in this case, if you taste the cake, that's conditional 1. You're standing in front of the cake. It's very likely that you're going to taste the cake, so you will like it. Maybe you've got the fork in your hand already. However, 1 letter more and the situation changes entirely. If you tasted the cake, it's not likely anymore that you're really going to taste the cake. And that's the slight difference that 1 letter, 1 single letter can make. And the good thing is, with eSquirrel, the students see the difference, or they can try it out and they get immediate feedback by the app, whether it was true or whether it was the correct decision or not. And the good thing is, with eSquirrel, you can raise the level of difficulty. So once you've covered the basics, you can make the tasks a bit more difficult, as you can see with the pair gap question format, where you've got the 2 sentence parts, and for each sentence part, for each clause of the conditional, you've got the different options, and you have to decide whether it's conditional 1, 2, or 3. Yes. Grammar is also about spelling, because different spelling can mean different things. And in this case, you can see in the screenshot, there are 4 versions of the word boy. Boys with an apostrophe between the Y and the S, then there's no apostrophe, and then there's just boy, and then there's the apostrophe after the S. All of those 4 versions are per se correct versions of the word boy. They just mean different things. And by looking at those 4 options, students get aware that there are differences between tiny details such as the apostrophe and the S. This is also one of the examples that you've certainly come across, the Y. When does the Y remain the Y, and when does it become an I and an E? And with eSquirrel, with tasks like this one, you can really put the focus on the students on this feature of grammar spelling, and they can practice it. And maybe you can add an explanation, as it is the case here, in the top of the building, of the picture. And yes, the students have to apply the knowledge and get immediate feedback whether they were right or whether they were wrong. I also like this task a lot. I've been in the situation when I tried to explain it to my students, and they all nodded and said, yes, we understood it. And then the next lesson, they come to me and said, Mr. Perksteiner, I didn't really get it last time, but I played through the quest at home and now I get it. So they learn through playing eSquirrel quests. Yes, and that's also one of the advantages of using eSquirrel for grammar training. You've probably had the experience that you had to write lots of sentences when you had to practice grammar, or you had to fill in words, and the time you lose just to write the rest of the sentence that's not really relevant for grammar comprehension, that's just a waste of time in many cases, in many situations. And that is not the case when you practice grammar with eSquirrel. You just focus on the grammar and you don't lose any time through writing several sentences into your workbook. All right, and spelling can also be trained with eSquirrel when you use the type-in question format, such as bad worse or the worst. So this is another example of grammar training. All right, third part of how to enhance language textbooks. Reading comprehension. You read a text and you're supposed to filter the correct pieces of information, and the teacher asks you what the text is about or what information you gained from it. Classic example, multiple choice. It's not rocket science, but it's the format that is used for reading comprehension tasks all across the world. I've just listed a couple of school exams that use multiple choice. For a good part, it's the Matura in Austria, the Abitur in Germany, A-levels, GCSEs in the UK, or SATs in the US. So you will, wherever you go and wherever you study, you will always use multiple choice questions, and that's no different with eSquirrel. So here you can see different examples where students have to read texts about South Africa. In the first case, it's about the Kruger National Park on page 77, which you can see in the quest title. And then there's the question, there are different answers, and obviously students have to tick the correct answer. But multiple choice is not the only way to test or to practice reading comprehension skills. You can use the gap fill exercise by transforming it into this one, into this example. Put the events of the story in the correct order. And the students, admittedly, this is not a very complex story. This is for 11-year-olds, but still they have to read through the text and then put the events of the story in the correct order. So that's another way to practice reading skills with eSquirrel. It doesn't have to be multiple choice all the time. And you're certainly familiar with that format. You make a statement and students have to say whether the statement is true or false, depending on what the original text in your English or language textbook said. Okay, last but not least, the last part of enhancing language books, textbooks, is listening comprehension tasks. And I already mentioned earlier that it's very easy to implement audio files in eSquirrel. So if you're a publisher and you've already produced your audio files, you can easily implement them in eSquirrel, and you can use them so that each student can listen to the audio files individually in their personal at their personal speed. We know that some students are faster, they are more talented in understanding, and some are slower, and each of them could work independently and gain more from it than just listening to something in class altogether and not really understand a lot of it. The audio option can be combined obviously with all the different 8 question formats. So you get more change, and yes, you can gain the maximum from that option. Also, and that's the second point I listed here, for students that like to, or that maybe have deficiencies in pronunciation, they can listen to the audio files again and again, and they can improve their own pronunciation, which can be useful. It's not one of the crucial aspects of language as long as you are understood by other people, but still it helps to improve pronunciation, it can help to improve the pronunciation of students. Okay, that was the second part. Now comes the last part, which is my experience as a teacher with eSquirrel during school lockdowns. Yes, I think it's no surprise that eSquirrel is a very convenient tool for online lessons. I was lucky in comparison with some of my colleagues. Personally, I started to use eSquirrel nearly 5 years ago. It's been 4.5 years since I started using eSquirrel, and that's why I was in a lucky position that when the first lockdown about a year ago, a bit earlier, in March 2020, so when that started, I was really well prepared, not intentionally, but because I'd been using eSquirrel before that, I had already loads of digital teaching materials that I could use during my online lessons or as homework pieces. And so I had a big advantage in comparison to some of my colleagues who really struggled because all they had was classic worksheets on paper. And that's my next point. Some of my colleagues, or maybe if you have children that were in school and had to live through the online lessons, for some subjects, students had to download a document, start the printer, print it out, then fill it in. Again, not really getting any feedback of the answer, if the answer was correct or not. Then they had to scan it, upload it, and hand it in digitally. And lots of my colleagues had to do it this way because that's all they had. Lots of their students had to do it. And yes, luckily for me and my students, in many cases, they didn't have to do it. All they did was, I said, it very often worked like that. We started the online lesson. We talked about a certain subject. I'm talking about biology now, but the same applies for English. We talked about the subject, and after talking about the subject in combination with the book, with the help of the textbook, I said, you know what? Now we've talked about it. Now you get active. You take your phone or you start eSquirrel in your browser, and you do this quest and that quest. And afterwards, we're going to talk about it and see what you learned from it. And there was no printing, there was no scanning any documents, and the students just knew what they had to do, and they had it all in their phone, basically, because I linked the questions with the digital versions of the school books, so they didn't even have to have the school book in their hands. All they needed was their smartphone. And as we all know, students get separated from their smartphones very rarely these times. Yes, also great for me. And that was one of the big advantages in my English online lessons. I saw immediately what the progress of the students was. There were times when I said, okay, now we've talked about the present progressive. Now I want you, that was during the online lesson. And then I said, okay, now you take your phones, you practice quest 46 and 47, because I knew that was the quest, that were the quests about the present progressive. And then live, I saw on my screen when people reached the bronze or the silver level. Students could ask me. I saw who was faster, who was a bit slower. I even saw who wasn't very successful. They managed to get into the bronze level, but they got several questions wrong. And then I said, okay, you know what? I see you've reached the bronze level, but you might take another look at the quest. Try it again, try to get more correct answers. If you need help, if you want me to explain the grammar feature to you one more time, I can help you out, or you can tell me which question in particular is problematic for you. And so I could deal with the weaker or slower students, while the faster students could work independently. Yes, and that's the next point. It enables teacher-independent learning. I also had students who voluntarily did more work than they had to, because they just like to work on the smartphone and they knew things or they practiced more than I asked them to practice, and that's a great thing, so that the students who have fewer difficulties or maybe are a bit more talented to just do more and improve their level even more. Yes, what did I use as a teacher? What features? For me, the homework feature was very useful. Quite often I said, as I just mentioned, after talking about a certain topic, now it's your time to work. I set the deadline, and then I saw who, and then I immediately saw who did the quest on time and who didn't. I sometimes use the online quiz, even though I must say the results of the online quizzes I couldn't really take them as 100% relevant, because obviously when they're at home, I couldn't look at them while they were doing the online quizzes. There is always the option of cheating, and so I could raise the tension maybe a little bit, but I wouldn't take the results too seriously from the quizzes. So that's more useful when you're in class with the students and when they do the quizzes right in front of you and when you can look over their shoulders. Yes, in general, I now have lots of data about the work rate of my students and about the success of my students, and I can give them individual feedback and can tell them, you know what, you might want to take a look at this again, or you are between 2 grades right now for your certificate. Maybe if you want to have the better grade, you might want to sit down and practice a bit more. And when I see you've reached higher levels in several or in some of the crucial quests that I want you to do, you will get the better grade. Yes. I've talked about lots of positive aspects of eSquirrel. Still, there are some limitations. Obviously, when you learn a language, you can't learn a language with your smartphone alone. Speaking a language is always more fun when you're in a classroom, when you're with other students, when you can practice dialogues, when you can act out dialogues, or when you can sing together. So this is simply not possible with eSquirrel, but it's not possible with any digital device. And yes, that's it. Language is just a human-to-human interaction, or in many cases, and obviously eSquirrel cannot replicate that, but neither can any of the other digital tools. Yes. So that's all from me now. Yes, I've talked for 40 minutes now. If you have questions, you can get in touch. You can write me an email, but you can also, if you want,